is the Voice of Turkey's English language transmission broadcasting from Ankara in the 49-meter band between 1830 and 1930 UTC on 5945 kHz to Europe, between 2030 and 2130 UTC in the 31-meter band on 9875 kHz to South Asia and Australia, between 2200 and 2300 UTC in the 31-meter band and on 9830 kHz to Europe, Eastern USA and Canada, and in the 25-meter band on 11660 kHz between 1630 and 1730 UTC to Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. The Voice of Turkey is also beamed between 0300 and 0400 UTC in the 41-meter band and on 7275 kHz to Europe, the USA, Eastern Canada and Cuba, between 0300 and 0400 UTC in the 49-meter band on 6165 kHz to Iraq, Syria, Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. You can listen to us over the Turksat 3A and 4A satellites and on the internet at www.trt.net.tr through the Voice of Turkey link. Please note that transmissions broadcast between 2200 and 2300 UTC and between 0300 and 0400 UTC have been pre-recorded. Our email address is englishdesk@trt.net.tr.
Turkey emphasized importance of exporting Russian grain fertilizer, emphasizing that the Istanbul grain deal is running smoothly. The Turkish president on Friday said more than 4 million tons of grain has so far been exported from Ukrainian ports. As part of the deal, more than 4 million tons of grain have been exported through the grain corridor. It is still continuing, Recep Tayyip Erdogan told reporters after Friday prayer in Istanbul. Stressing the importance of exporting Russian grain and fertilizers, Erdogan said that it will help poor countries. On a prisoner swap deal between Ukraine and Russia, Erdogan said 200 of those prisoners are currently guests of Turkey. These are guests. One of them was named that Mr. Vladimir Putin insisted on. We also sent that person to Russia, he added. Earlier this week, Erdogan announced that Ukraine and Russia agreed to exchange 200 prisoners as a result of Turkey's mediation and diplomatic exchange with the leaders of the two countries. He had told reporters in New York that the prisoners' exchange under Turkey's mediation was an important step toward ending the war between the two countries. Pakistan, unable to stand on its own without global community help, says Premier. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said the country will be unable to stand on its own without international community assistance, as the recent destructive flood caused billions of dollars in infrastructure damage. Sharif appealed to rich nations and financial organizations for immediate debt relief in an interview with Bloomberg TV. We have spoken to European leaders and other leaders to help us in the Paris Club to get us moratorium, he said, referring to a group of rich creditor nations. Unless we get substantial relief, how can the world expect us to stand on our own feet? It's simply impossible, he added. The country is now facing an epidemic threat as a result of one of the third of the country being submerged, the Premier said, adding, God forbid this happens, all hell will break loose. He also spoke about the International Monetary Fund's IMF stringent conditions for its bailout package, which resulted in massive inflation and price hikes in the South Asian country. Pakistan has debt obligations in the next 2 months, he said, adding that his government has just signed an agreement with the IMF that includes very tough conditionalities, that includes tax on petroleum and electricity. The country is already in an economic crisis as the IMF released a long-delayed $1.17 billion tranche of its bailout package for the cash-strapped country early this month. However, the UN has proposed suspending all international debt, repayments and restructuring loans with creditors as a result of the country's devastating floods. In July, the Ministry of Economic Affairs stated in a written response to Parliament that Pakistan's total external debt, all liabilities, exceeded $126 billion. Azerbaijan on Friday accused Armenia of violating a truce and targeting its military positions along the border, marking the end of full lull in violent clashes that claimed dozens of lives last week. Armenian forces fired on Azerbaijani positions in the directions of Kokabeni settlements of the Tovuz region, Keshtag and Barmagbina settlements of the Kaljabar region, and Tazakent settlement of the Dasakant region, the Azerbaijani defense minister said in a statement. The Armenian units were in directions of the Chinarli settlements of Tovuzgala region and Yukari Shorzga, Gunashli and Zarkand settlements of the Basarkecha region, the statement said. They used various caliber weapons in their attacks, which started late Thursday night and continued until Friday morning, it added. More than 200 Armenian soldiers and 80 Azerbaijani personnel were killed in the last week flare-up, which ended with a truce widely welcomed by international community. The clashes were the latest among the two former Soviet republics, who have had tense relations since 1991, when the Armenian military occupied Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as Upper Karabakh, a territory internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. They followed the 2020 conflict, in which Azerbaijan liberated several cities and over 300 settlements and villages from Armenian occupation. That bout of fighting ended with a deal brokered by Russia and Turkey. At least 35 dead in Iran protests over the death of women in police custody. The death toll from protests in Iran over the death of a young woman in police custody has risen to 35, according to state media. The Iranian state television said late Friday that 35 protesters and policemen have been killed since the protester erupted last Saturday, following the funeral of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman who died after detained by the morality police in Tehran on September 13 for allegedly wearing her hijab improperly. Authorities have sought to pin blame on her death on a heart attack, but her family and many in Iran have rejected the claim, saying she was the victim of police brutality. Authorities have promised a true investigation into Amini's death. Her death has triggered a wave of angry protests in Iran over the past week, with protesters calling for justice and accountability. The state television said the official death toll will be announced by Iranian authorities later, which have not given a full accounting of the casualties so far. The incident has drawn condemnation from many world leaders and human rights groups, including the US, which has sanctioned Iran morality police in response to abuse and violence against Iranian women and the violation of the rights of peaceful Iranian protesters. US has double standard on Greece actions against Turkey foreign minister. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said Friday that US has a double standard when it comes to responding to Greece's actions against Turkey. Çavuşoğlu told a Council on Foreign Relations event in New York that the US and Turkey can have different opinions and disagreements, which he called natural. He touched on the unfair influence of some lobbies on Turkish-US relations, With these lobbies at play, the US followed a double-standard approach towards Turkey on some issues. Çavuşoğlu cited Greece's acts of hostility in the Aegean Sea. They went as far as radar-locking Turkish F-16s during a NATO mission. A couple of days later, Turkish aircraft were again radar-locked by their S-103 missiles in international airspace, he said. Nobody talks about these provocations. We only hear about Turkey's justified responses, he added. We don't see equal treatment either. For example, waivers are rightly applied to Indians' purchase of S-400 missiles, while Turkey is placed under CAATS for acquiring the same system, said the foreign minister, referring to countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act. Tons of military equipment is provided to a terror group in Syria, while we, as an ally, are subjected to sanctions, he added. The top diplomat said Ankara asked for an impartial stance towards an ally that has paid a huge price for Euro-Atlantic security for decades. And that was the news brought to you by the Voice of Turkey.